Okay, well, thanks, Peter, for having me back again for the third time. And today or tonight, for me, I'm going to just discuss a little bit about breathing and emotions. And then, as Peter mentioned, he'll lead us through a practice meditation on something related in some fashion, I'm guessing. But I want to start the first couple times I've talked, I've always tried to have some sort of theme or a word we come back to. The first time it was deeper, slower, quieter, and more regular. And that was kind of our mantra for how we should be breathing to calm our nervous system, to feel better, and something we could adopt at any moment, any time. So then the second time we talked a little bit about equanimity. And then today I want to talk about a new word I learned that blew my mind that I'm really excited about, and it's resiliency. And I want to make the theme for tonight's talk emotional resiliency, since we're talking about breathing and emotions. But I want to share the quote from Dr. Amishi Jha. She's a professor at the University of Miami, so just a few hours away from where I am. And she says people talk a lot about resilience, but what you'll learn in this book is really what I call presilience. So resilience means bouncing back from adversity, but what we want is to train our minds so that we maintain our capacities even as we are experiencing challenge. And I just love that idea of maintaining capacities even as we're experiencing challenges, because of course we need resiliency, right? As everyone gets hit with things, surgeries, with back pains that we can't, it's out of our control. So we need resiliency to bounce back. But this idea of trying to build presiliency so that while we're in these tough situations, and especially tough emotional situations, we know we have the mental capacities, the inner resources to get through it. And we're confident in our abilities. And so that's the theme for tonight, trying to build emotional resiliency. And the good news is that because all of you already meditate, mindfulness builds resilience. So what Dr. Jha says is that mindfulness guides us to be present through these demanding circumstances and to know that we have the mental capacities we need to handle it. And so by practicing mindfulness, we're already building this resiliency idea. And where I want to bring in the breath now is that, in basically every ancient tradition, anywhere you look, breathing gets brought in as the basis for mindful attention, simply because our breath is always with us. It gives us an anchor we can return to anytime we need to recenter. And I just shared a few quotes here, so you can go back and read. I won't read these all word for word, but just to kind of show you a variety of different places where you see it from Dr. Amishi Jha again, from Jon Kabat-Zinn, the creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction, Larry Rosenberg, a big proponent of the Anapanasati Sutra in Buddhism, and mindfulness of breathing, and then the Tibetan yoga of breath, looking at, breathing as not just something supporting our physical body, but also our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And so really at the center of all of this is the breath for building this mindfulness in one aspect, but then also knowing that this connection comes back to the emotion. So all of these ancient traditions knew that if we were emotionally upset, if we had stress, if we were anxiety, whatever it might be, that the breath was the gateway to that. So what I want to talk about is why that is. So why breathing itself plus voluntary changes of our breathing, what some people refer to as breath work, but just, slow nasal breathing practices, how they build emotional resilience in our lives. So to do that, I want to start by talking about something really neat, a study back in 2002. And it began with what we all know, right? That how we feel, our emotions, things that are going on, influence how we breathe. So we probably all experienced this, that if you're stressed, you breathe more, erratically, maybe more out of your upper chest and hyperventilate more. When you're crying, and sad, you breathe differently. And then when you're happy and calm, you breathe a lot, calmer, more relaxed. So that's kind of well known, and that had been known forever, right? But what this study found is that how you breathe also influences how you feel. So it was this two-way street of breathing and emotions. And the way they did that was really neat. So they took a group of people and they said, hey, we want you to elicit some different feelings, feel joy, feel anger, feel these different feelings. And then we're going to ask you about your breathing, ask you if you were able to elicit the feeling, and take some measurements. And then they had all this data from that first experiment. Then they went to a whole nother group of people who had no clue what was going on with the study. And they said, hey, breathe like this or breathe like that. And they gave them the breathing patterns from this first experiment. And what they found, probably no surprise since I've had it up for a while here, is that the breathing patterns elicited the feelings. So if they gave them something that was like a joy breathing, a happier breathing, they felt happier feelings, even without being told that's what should happen. And so there's an amazing quote from Emma Sapala, PhD, in her great book, The Happiness Track, that basically said the finding that we can change how we feel by using our breath is revolutionary. And I think that's just an amazing way to preface how powerful the breath can be for our emotional state, because all of us, who've practiced any type of mindfulness, meditation, any kind of contemplative practice, we know our thoughts are pretty crazy, right? And so anytime we find ourselves in like an emotional trying state, trying to think our way out of it, it never seems to work. It usually backfires and it makes it worse, right? And so having a tool like the breath that's always with us, that we can voluntarily control, that, we've been given this gift of control, is pretty revolutionary, because now we have a way to alter our emotional state in the moment and help take back that control, getting back to that emotional resiliency. So how does it do this? So why is the breath so powerful? Why is it so revolutionary? There's several ways, but two I want to touch on that I think are really cool and really important for understanding the breath's power are changes in our autonomic nervous system, and then changes actually inside of our brain that happen when we breathe. So we'll start with the first part, the nervous system. So there was a study back in 2010, and it was just kind of looking at people and saying people with a higher vagal tone, which is basically means they're in their nervous system's in a calmer state more often. The activity of their parasympathetic nervous system is higher. They generally experience more positive emotions. So they experience things like awe and joy and love more frequently than people with lower vagal tone. And so that's step one. Okay, we know if we have high vagal tone, we have more positive emotions. But where the breath comes in is that breathing is one of the most effective, one of the fastest and easiest ways to build our vagal tone. So I just threw a couple studies here that have shown it. One in Nature Scientific Reports, just showing that just one session of slow breathing can help to build our vagal tone in younger and older adults. So it's kind of this universal physiological mechanism we have within our bodies. And then this one is super important on the bottom, because what it did is it looked at it was 223 different studies on voluntary slow breathing, and they found that during the practice, your vagal tone goes up. So they measure it as heart rate variability. So during it, it's going up. Immediately afterward, it goes up. And then if you practice consistently, your baseline jumps up. So, all throughout the day, your vagal tone is a little higher, meaning all throughout the day, you can experience more positive emotions. So it's kind of like you do that deeper, slower, quieter, more regular mantra. You're breathing slowly, getting more vagal tone, and then you're going to experience more positive emotions throughout your day. And so that's a really powerful change we can do with just our breath to experience better emotional health. Another way that it does this is really neat, and it's from a paper in 2015 called Self-Regulation of Breathing as a Primary Treatment for Anxiety. And that word primary is really cool here, because a lot of times in breathing studies, it's always a supplementary or secondary. And they made an argument that, really we should be asking people to voluntarily change their breathing patterns as the first line of defense against anxiety, because it's so powerful. And what they argued was that when we do these slow breathing practices and we increase our vagal tone and we activate that parasympathetic nervous system, it actually makes us, I put in parentheses, physiologically incapable of experiencing negative emotions. Of course, that's not true, right? We know that things happen and we'll still experience negative emotions. But the idea is that it's making it a lot harder just inside of your body to experience negative emotions. And the way they argued is that it essentially made cells in certain regions less excitable. So like in your amygdala, where you have fear and that's what causes stress, they found that, when you do these slow breathing practices, it makes the cells less excitable. And so they said basically causing physiological inhibition of negative emotions. And I just thought that was like the coolest sentence ever to see in a a scientific journal, basically saying, look, we can just breathe slowly and reduce our cell excitability and reduce our chances of experiencing negative emotions. And then they said it's apparent that individuals possess the ability to alter emotional states using the voluntary control of breathing and mindset. So again, just super powerful to see this stuff in scientific journals. And again, all known thousands of years ago by all the ancient traditions that relied on the breath as the center point for meditation, for mindfulness. Okay, so that's the first part, changing our nervous system. So the second part is actually changing our brain. So there's two different ways it does this, but the one I want to focus on is actually our nose. So getting back to those ancient traditions, we know that basically anytime we sit down to meditate or do any kind of breathing practices back in like pranayama or the ancient Chinese breathing techniques, they were all done through the nose. And so what this paper looked at back in 2018 was the role of the nose. And it said that nasal stimulation represents the fundamental link between these slow breathing techniques and then the brain, the nervous system, and the psychological and behavioral output. So basically they're saying, you could breathe slowly all you want, but if you're using your mouth, it's not going to have as many benefits. It's got to be done through the nose, because the nose gives us this link to our brain that changes how we feel, and how it's kind of a top-down mechanism. So where did they come up with this? Well, there was a lot of research showing that when you breathe through your nose, it synchronizes brainwave activity. Now, this is highly oversimplified just for illustration purposes, but this one study in 2016 basically showed that when you're mouth breathing, the brain waves are all disorganized. And then when you go into nasal breathing, it synchronizes brain waves throughout many different regions of the brain, which was really unexpected. So, we have our olfactory system that's there for smelling, and that gets a really, a primary role in brain function. It's basically your brain is hanging down into your nasal cavity. And so air is hitting essentially your brain, but it was always thought that this was only for smell. Well, it turned out that just the stimulation, just the air passing over it, was activating this olfactory bulb and then projecting messages out to other regions of the brain, therefore leading to this organization of brain waves and better, they showed better cognitive function, as it says here, modulates cognitive function, better memory and things like that. But for our purposes, a newer study, and I actually just finished reading this one this morning. It was published in 2022, and it was a crazy study that I didn't understand most of it. I'll be honest, a lot of the brain stuff goes way over my head. But what they found was that when you breathe nasally, it increases connectivity across many brain regions, a lot more than mouth breathing. And they essentially said that with all the stuff they found with the brain imagery and the nervous system measurements, they argue that basically any type of non-ordinary state of consciousness experienced by meditators seems to be highly related to slow-paced stimulation of the olfactory bulb. So it was really dependent on that nasal breathing. So how did they figure this out? Well, they had people breathe slowly through their nose or slowly through their mouth. They measured their nervous system, they measured their brain waves, and they asked them a bunch of questions. And it turned out that when they were breathing through their nose, they had experienced a lot more positive emotions, and specifically joy, more than mouth breathing. So just nose breathing versus mouth, you're going to get more positive emotions. They had more altered states of consciousness, which was kind of interesting. But they also had lower psychological and physical tension. So when they asked them, how do you feel? They felt less tension, and they felt less anxiety when they were breathing through their nose than through their mouth. And so all of this together suggests that we should, breathe slowly, breathe through our nose, and then it'll change our nervous system and it'll change our brains for the better. And to, again, get back to that emotional resiliency, we'll be building this capacity so that when these tough situations hit us, will be more prepared to do it. So what does it mean altogether in real life, sort of, I guess, so to speak, even though I'm still going to show a couple studies, but to get some more realistic numbers on it, it would mean that what I just said, building emotional resilience. But for people with diabetes, for example, there's studies showing that if you practice 6 months of diaphragmatic breathing and stress reduction, it can significantly reduce depression, anxiety, and stress scores on this -21 questionnaire, again, which leads to better emotional health. But a study I really want to highlight was published earlier this year. It was titled "The Effect of Breathwork on Stress and Mental Health, a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials." And I really think this is, of everything I've gone through with all this breathing stuff that I've become obsessed with, this is probably the most important piece of work I've seen to really show the efficacy of breathing for stress and mental health, as it says here. And so a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials is kind of like the top of the line, the gold standard for a scientific study, and it was published in Nature, so it's a really prestigious journal. So what did they find? Well, they found that breathing was as effective as cognitive behavioral therapy, meditation, mindfulness, and acceptance of emotions for reducing stress. So that is pretty mind-blowing, because these are sort of the go-to, if you see a psychiatrist or some sort of psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy is usually the very first thing you get asked to do. And so seeing that just breathing alone, and it was specifically slow breathing, I should have mentioned that, was just as effective. Then they found that breathing was just as effective as physical activity for reducing anxiety and depression symptoms. So they weren't saying you could replace physical activity with breathing, right? That's definitely not what they were implying. But what they were saying is, if you're just looking at those symptoms of anxiety and depression, a regular breathing practice is almost just as effective as a regular physical activity. So again, just really supporting this idea of changing our nervous system and changing our brain. And then finally, and this was the most important point of the whole study, was that whether breathing was self-learned remotely, taught one-on-one, taught in a group, in person, none of it impacted the results. And why that's so important is that things like cognitive behavioral therapy requires, a trained facilitator. They have to update their credentials all the time and get, up-to-date training. And your insurance might not cover it. It could cost more money and things like that. And whereas breathing, you could download an app on your phone that's free, and it will guide you through breathing exercises. And essentially what this study was showing was that, any of them will work. If you do want to go to a coach, if you do want to go to a class, if you want to join a community, it'll be probably more helpful. But if you don't, you don't have to. And I think that's like the most powerful part of all of this breathing stuff, is the self-agency it gives you, the ability to take control and, in your time, whenever you can fit it into your schedule and still get the benefits. So they basically said, overall, the results show that breathwork may be effective for improving stress and mental health. And since this is a meditation community, I just thought it was another cool quote to see in a scientific article, that research on breathwork could be likened to that of meditation, which has received an unprecedented surge in scientific exploration 2 decades ago. So basically that we may be at a similar cusp with breathwork and anticipate considerable growth in the field. So I find this highly encouraging, that hopefully one day, if you tell people you do breathing exercises, they'll applaud you. Just like, if you tell them you meditate, people usually think that's a great idea, and they don't give you a hard time. Right now, it's not quite like that with the word breathwork, but hopefully studies like this and continued scientific research and people just trying it and experiencing the benefits, we'll see that kind of grow into something more acceptable. So I probably went way too fast, but that's all I had for tonight. Be glad to chat about anything before Peter leads us through the session, and just thank you again for having me back for another time, and for your attention.
I have a question, Nick.
Yes.
About the timing between doing the slow nasal breathing and brain waves. What kind of time frame is that to affect the brain waves?
So it was a 15-minute session, and the way they did it, they could only measure it before and after. So they actually weren't measuring it during. So it was right at the end of the 15 minutes. So I'm not sure how long it takes, if there's maybe it was only 2 minutes in or 3 minutes in, but it was a 15-minute session.
So we would imagine that would be something that the practitioner could perceive.
Yes. Oh yeah, for sure. And well, that's hard. That's a good question, actually. You feel the calmness, definitely. And you feel that kind of synchronization of your body and your mind and all of that. But knowing whether the brain waves are organized, I don't know how you would actually feel that, but you definitely notice. I would say, from years of doing this every morning, by the 8-minute mark, I usually feel phenomenal. But if I can do even just like 4 or 5 minutes, I feel it. But usually around the 8 to 10-minute mark is when I feel like a whole new person.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Nick, real quick, how long do those effects last?
The brainwave effects?
Like when you said you feel like fantastic after 8 minutes.
Well, that's that's a really tough one to assess. So definitely so a lot of it depends on my sleep. So if I sleep really well, the effects of the breathing are way more pronounced, which is interesting. But usually for at least a good hour to an hour and a half, I feel phenomenal. Well, I shouldn't say phenomenal. I just feel a lot more at ease, calmer, more focused and things like that. But what I've noticed with continuous practice is that it's all the time now. Of course I still get upset and stressed and things like that, but it's incredible when I think about who I was as a person, with all sorts of messed up mental problems. And when I deal with my daughter now and my just family and stuff, it's I'm so much calmer and more present and things like that. And so it definitely has lasting effects, but the real kind of joyful, euphoric, I'd say at least an hour or so. That's
great. This was fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to make my kids watch this recording because they all have, some of them have, issues or stress and everything. So this is great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Do you have a favorite app for breathwork?
Yeah. Well, I have two. Let's see. So there's one just called Breathe, and it's real simple. And I like that one because it has a lot of flexibility, and I'm weird. I like to change it to very specific settings. And that one has a nice tone to it for the breathing. So it's just called Breathe, and it's on Google and Apple. But there's another one called the Breathing app, and that one is really simple. And it has the nicest sounds ever. It's so relaxing. It'll get you into resonance really quick. You'll feel that harmony a lot faster just because the tones. It was made by the artist Moby, if you're familiar with Moby.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and it's got you can hear different levels, and if you wear headphones, it's it's out of control. So I definitely recommend the Breathing app, but it doesn't have much flexibility, but no email, no not. You just literally download it and start breathing. So yeah.
Amazing. I love the combination of the sound and the breathing. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, he nailed it. It was with Eddie Stern, and Eddie Stern's a big practitioner of yoga and breathing. So I think they made sure it worked well. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Bob, did you want to say anything? You're okay?
Yeah, I lost the screen now. But Nick, great job. Love hearing all this, but a little humor. You mean to tell me after running 5 o'clock in the morning for 15 years, 6 days a week, that I could have done this breathing instead of all that running?
Exactly, Bob. Definitely not. That's a whole different level of mental clarity you get from running. But breathing could have helped though, nasal breathing during running. That's a huge thing now. People are taping their mouths for marathons and stuff because it helps. Basically, it gives you more endurance. You're learning how to utilize oxygen better. Your cellular metabolism increases, and there's all sorts of neat things people are finding out. But
very cool, very good. I've enjoyed that very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't imagine there's any studies that show the effect of breathing on your cardiovascular system, but maybe there is. I don't, obviously running has some great cardio benefits. Just curious, Nick, this idea of compounding. So, in meditation, we might say over time, we may achieve, I don't want to say better results, but we can expect perhaps that after a year of meditating compared to one day, we may achieve better results. So a compounding effect. And I'm wondering if there's a compounding effect also with breathing as itself. So the more you do, let's say a slow nasal breathing practice, the results will compound, but also how that may also be compounded with meditation. So and we'll do a little bit of that to close the practice tonight. But when you combine the breathing practice with meditation, can we expect compounded results or just more of the same, which is all good?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's two ways to answer it. So with breathing itself, there are definitely compounding benefits for your nervous system, for example, like increasing your vagal tone and things like that we talked about, lowering blood pressure over time. So there's definitely things that like physiologically compound, but like the stress levels is the biggest one, that over time, your baseline stress going down, down, down. But combining it with meditation is really interesting because, I'm weird and I consider breathwork meditation. Like I have like a lot of thoughts about it, but I really think that breathing is just another form of meditation. Like you wouldn't compare on like, let's say Vipassana to loving kindness meditation, right? Because they have two completely different goals as far as what you're trying to accomplish with that meditation. And so if someone said, I do TM and I do loving kindness, you'd probably say, well, they probably get different outcomes. And so I kind of think of breathing as another avenue to that, because it requires such mental focus on the task at hand that it is a meditation. It is returning to the breath over and over again, but it's with more like physiological outcomes because you're pacing it at certain rates to get this resonance and things like that. So I think so to answer the question though, I do think it would compound. It would just be like, okay, you're using the breath to train this portion of life, and you're using whatever meditation you're focusing on that day to train that portion of your attention or your compassion or whatever it might be. So they could be really complementary in a sense.
Sure. No, that makes sense, of course. And a lot of times we'll use different anchors in our practice. So we know breathing, of course, is a main anchor for most of us. But clearly you can have a practice that just using sound.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing that the combination of the breath, when the breath is the anchor consciously, and engaging in some type of meditation practice at the same time, that you walk away like a latke. For those that get that reference. Okay. Anything else? And Nick, I think the beauty of your presentation is so simple. The message is so simple but so powerful, and some really great takeaway. And I remember from the first session that you did, I think at that time I did get the breathing app. I think that's one that has the ball that goes up.
Mm.
And so it's also visual for some people as well. And I think the recommendation was 15 or 20 minutes a day of the slow breathing. And I would start my day with that and really notice a big difference right away. So I think it's something that for those that haven't tried these breathing techniques, breathing apps, and a lot of the slow breathing, nasal breathing, of course, is something we all have to learn over time, because we're taught so much to breathe through our mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of when I started my own meditation practice, I was doing a lot of mouth breathing, and yoga was doing mouth breathing until you kind of retrain this. But really interesting to hear a lot of the research behind this.
Yeah, thanks. And there is a little bit of evidence that the minimum effective dose is about 10 minutes a day. So if you're looking for the lowest you could do, 10 minutes.
And just on that, is there any evidence that shows like sandwiching it? So, adding in a 10-minute in the morning, and then I imagine adding something evening might also be cumulative effect, or
I can say just anecdotally in my own life, yes, for sure. just for the sleep portion. If you're
Sure.
doing another session before bed, I try to do 10 minutes while I'm in bed. I usually fall asleep doing it, but it really helps with that.
Cool. Nick, thank you so much. And I don't know if there are any other questions. I don't want to cut into anyone's time for asking questions or comments. Nick, you also had a course. You have a course coming up, so I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. Just to mention that to the squad.
Sure. Yeah. Breathing for emotional and mental health, or mental and emotional health. It's going to be like a 4-week course in May. So, yeah, excited about it. And anyone here, I'll send a huge discount to the sangha so that it's really cheap. I would just give it to you for free, but then you wouldn't be as committed. You got to pay a little bit so that you'll be dedicated to that, showing up and practicing.
No, I really appreciate that, and we could definitely share that. If there's a code or something, we could share it with with our community, our newsletter, or if that's
I'll send it to you. Yep.
Because I think we all can benefit from this continued practice, and I really appreciate you coming on the Monday night past your bedtime, and to share with us. And with that, why don't we actually focus our practice for this evening using some of the breath work and some of the things that we're learning with this. So encouraging you tonight to focus on the nasal breathing. So why don't we begin by just settling into our space as we always do, and just taking the moment to notice where we are. And maybe we think of that emotionally. What are you feeling? You may also want to begin this practice. So perhaps if there was a tough time today, revisiting that perhaps, just considering where you are emotionally, and settle into your space as you engage your breath. Just noticing the quality of your breath, and perhaps related to that emotion, or just the breath itself, if it's tends to be shorter today, this evening, or it's a breath of ease or a little choppy. We've had a few cycles just to even sense that rhythm. How is your breath? And as we just continue to breathe naturally through our nose, I consider these words: deeper, slower, a little quieter. So noticing how much effort we put into breathing. If it's comfortable, can we just get a little quieter with the breath? It's as if there were a sweet baby in the room right with you, knowing that any sound that you make could disturb this child. As we Feel the weight of our own body connecting to the earth below us. So often we talk about the feel and the connection, the pull of gravity. In the lower half, but allowing our upper half to just be a little bit lighter if you're seated in a chair. Just creating a space for our breath. Even noticing that as we bring lightness to our upper body, allowing our head to float, that can create a beautiful full space. The breath, even noticing, watching with your mind's eye as you bring the breath in through your nostrils. Slowly, quietly. Just noticing how that fills this inner cavity. Sometimes it can feel like a rush of water going over the waterfall. As you breathe in, as you exhale, perhaps the mist rising up. Exiting the breath the same way it came in. See if you can breathe even deeper, slower, quieter. Just watching the breath cascade. Feel like the tide of an ocean coming in and receding. Watching for that moment, that space between the inhale and the exhale. Not necessarily trying to change it, just noticing there's a smooth connection or perhaps a momentary space between the inhale and the exhale, that pause. In that pause, noticing any feeling. Perhaps it's a feeling of relief. Noticing where you feel that. Where in your body. Any moment you notice your mind is beginning to have a little conversation with itself, little chat, or just acknowledging that, but returning to the breath, coming back to the present. As we move deeper into this breath work, I invite you to see if you can begin to count your inhale to 7, 8, or 9. Slowly counting up to that number. When reaching it, perhaps taking a pause before slowly exhaling at the same rate. See if you can just, at the count of 1 at the end. So count it up to 7. You want to exhale, maybe 8 or 9. Pausing. And repeating, not trying to stress yourself. So find something that's comfortable, but seeing if you can go deeper, slower, quieter. Pausing just for a moment between the inhale and the exhale. Just continue to breathe this way for another 2 or 3 counts up and down. At the different points of the inhale and the exhale, perhaps even noticing where it may feel a little lighter, perhaps, or it's a little tickle or a real sense of ease. What points of the breath. And you feel maybe more than the breath. without giving it much thought, perhaps even noticing if it's in the same spot or the same feeling for the inhale and the exhale. Or perhaps it's a space that radiates, almost like it glows. If you can just add one more element to this, if there's something that you're experiencing that feels good related to the breath, just when you hit that spot, bring a gentle smile to your face. Almost as if you're marking that spot. If it's something that's more of a glowing feeling or radiating goodness and ease, you can just keep the smile. If you haven't already, it's okay to drop the count now and return into an easier breath, perhaps. Still keep with the flow, the pattern. So inhale, pause, exhale, pause. You can bring to your mind's eye something that brings you joy, something that really makes you smile, whether it's a person you love being with or beloved pet, day at the beach, a walk in the woods. Just noticing your own breath in this moment. How it may feel to breathe in the presence of joy, real joy, happiness. Noticing any spot or space or particular part of your inhale or exhale that you're experiencing that. Breathing into that space. Allowing that to grow within your own body, letting that expand. Connecting that perhaps with a smile on your face. Noticing even with your eyes closed, any visual changes of color. So begin to bring this practice to a close this evening. Just noticing at this point again the quality of your breath, inviting you to return to a normal, easy breath. Perhaps noticing any quality as quality of gentleness, ease perhaps. Any shifts that may have occurred and just noting that. Also taking a mental note of any part of this practice that felt really sweet. Just being able to recall that, and at the same time, anything that was difficult or didn't feel anything at all, noticing that. And being okay with that as well. I invite you all to end the practice with a deep breath through the nose, exhaling. You need to bring some small movements back to your extremities, your hands, your feet, moving to your toes, your fingers, and perhaps even tracing with your hands along your skin, across your body. Bringing some larger movements back. Ready, if you have not done so, to gently open your eyes, letting some light back into your space. And to bring this practice to a close tonight, enjoying our breathing sangha.